Welcome to another episode of Pit Lane Parlay.
Welcome to another episode of Pit Lane Parlay. My name is host Mike Jokum. My pal Frank Santoroski joins me as we discuss another long-lost Indycar venue. This week, Ontario Motorspeedway, also known as the Big O and Indianapolis of the West. Frank, thanks for joining me. Let's dive right in. Where do you want to start?
Oh, well, Mike, again, thanks for having me. But let's just quickly talk about how short the history of Ontario was. You're talking a track that broke ground in late '68, opened up to a lot of fanfare in 1970, and by 1980 it was closed, shuttered. The only other thing I can compare that to is that track Chip Ganassi built in Chicago, in Cicero, that failed so quickly. And Ontario didn't actually fail, and we'll get into that later on. But just talk about the kind of the history and how the idea came about. But there were some different companies out there, construction companies, and even Filmways, which is a film company, looking to put a racetrack in the greater Los Angeles area, and they wanted to have like you said, Indianapolis of the West. And they had a couple of different folks who tried, and then after the Filmways thing kind of fell through, the construction company, which was Stolt Construction Company, they brought the ideas and the plans to this guy named David Lockton. Now, Lockton is an agent, or he was an agent, and he represented a lot of Formula One drivers. He was also on the USAC drivers board, and he was good friends with Tony Holman. So this guy had a lot of connections in racing, and he was kind of intrigued by this idea of building a track out there on the West Coast to host major venues in racing. So with his connections, he was able to get guaranteed a 500-mile USAC race, an audition for Formula One, and an NHR race, a drag race, before he even had a track, which the fact that he had all that guaranteed, is like, if you build them, we will come, be able to get the financing. And $25.5 million they spent on building this place. And he was able to do this through industrial revenue bonds. And he was able to make the whole thing tax deductible, which is kind of unheard of for a business operating as a for-profit organization to be able to do this. Somehow this guy was able to weasel that through, and to my knowledge is the only time the IRS has ever allowed that. But so they, a series of industrial bonds and municipal bonds, he was able to go ahead and get this project underway. They had an 800-acre area to build the track, and by the time they got around to starting the track, a lot of it had been subdivided, parceled out, and sold. So he had to spend the time to get the options on all the parcels, which took him a couple of years, but he was able to get that done and get the project underway and build the track. Now, they patterned the track after Indianapolis, 2.5 miles around, but a couple of important differences. The straightaways were about 1 lane wider than Indianapolis, and the short chutes, where Indianapolis has a 9-degree banking in the turn and then flattens out again, the banking was consistent through the whole short chute. So the whole short chutes were banked on the Big O, which made the lap times the potential to be a bit faster than even Indianapolis. In addition to that, drag strip, infield road course, state-of-the-art, some suites, grandstands, electronic timing and scoring, which was a pretty new thing at the time, though. And this thing opened up to a lot of fanfare, and it was one of the most highly advanced tracks at the time when it opened up in 1970. Then they hired Rogers and Cohen, which is a Hollywood PR firm, to do the marketing, and they spent millions of dollars on marketing the opening of the track in the first couple of races there. They had an ad campaign that could be seen everywhere, and they packed the grandstands for the first IndyCar race there, which was a 500-mile race. And I want to say Jim McElreath won that race, but they packed the thing, and it was an overwhelming success. The problem with that is after that, they didn't keep up the marketing. So the crowds kind of dwindled, not hugely. So the first race was great. People loved it. It was awesome. They had the suites. Celebrity was there. James Garner drove the pace car. The thing opened up it was amazing. It was, like the best thing that had ever hit the West Coast concerning racing. And then, from there, they hosted NHRA event. They had NASCAR guys there starting in '72. They eventually added another date for the USAC IndyCars, which was they started out as a twin 200 to 100-mile races, and then in later years it was a 200-mile race. So they had 2 dates a year. They had NASCAR out there. They actually had, people talk about IndyCars and NASCAR sharing the same weekend. Well, they did that in Ontario. They had a USAC race along with USAC stocks, and then the next year they had a USAC race along with NASCAR, the Winston West. So it was a pretty neat place in its heyday.
Yeah, it sounds, especially that first year, they did everything right, from hiring PR people. The stands were sold out a couple months in advance of that first USAC race. Let's see here. I'm looking at my notes. Ronald Reagan at the time was the California governor, presented the winning trophy. President Richard Nixon was there. His daughter and her husband were there.
Well, Nixon's daughter was there.
Oh, I'm sorry, was represented at the event. See, guys, that is the importance of reading what you wrote down.
But yeah, there were 178,000 seats sold out, and they were sold out 6 weeks ahead of the green flag dropping. And you're talking, and they had a board of directors that was just packed with all kind of names from the business world, from the racing world. You had some celebrities in there. I know the Smothers brothers were on the board there, and Dick Smothers, who's a racer in his spare time, was on there. But Roger Penske, Pat Patrick, all these guys that eventually formed CART were part of the board of directors at Ontario.
Yeah, they really at least started out in a strong fashion. Before we continue on with kind of, I guess, how it fell apart at some point, there were some other pretty cool events that took place there. Evel Knievel jumped over a record 19 cars, drawing a crowd of 50,000 people. That was the day prior to one of the NASCAR races there in 1971. And there was also some movies filmed there, the Evel Knievel movie, and there's a few others that I can't find. I think Chips, the TV show, some was filmed there. There was the Ontario
Jump was filmed for the Evel Knievel movie. They filmed, so they used the actual footage of the actual jump in that Evel Knievel movie, where I believe it was George Hamilton played Evel Knievel. But my age, 50, Evel Knievel's just cool. I don't care. You know what I mean?
I think he's cool to anybody, even those like me who are not quite 50. The other cool thing, they had a concert somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 people. Parts were televised on ABC, Earth, Wind and Fire, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple,
Ted Nugent. Yeah, you had
Aerosmith. I mean, some amazing bands that my co-host Matt probably has never heard of, but just in general, that's a huge concert. Really, really cool to see. So, with that being said, I'll say one more thing here, and then we'll kind of talk about how the short history of Ontario started to take a turn for the worse. But just, like I normally do, running through a couple winners here. AJ Foyt won in just about everything he entered in here, whether it was now they call it NASCAR K&N Pro West, the USAC races. Let's see who else. Johnny Rutherford won a number of races here, like you mentioned.
Bobby Unser won a few there. I want to say AJ won like 5 or 6 IndyCar races there, plus two of the NASCAR races there.
5 USAC and the first 2 NASCAR races, as well as the first 2 K&N Pro Series races, whatever it used to be called back in the day. I do not know. I'm just going off of racing.
Oh, it was called Winston West back in the day. Winston
Perfect.
West is now what they call the K&N. But the goal of Ontario when they opened it was to be the first place to host all of the major series. They wanted to host, the NHRA drag racing, the stock cars, the Indy cars, and they wanted to host Formula One. They wanted to have the Ontario be the Formula One Grand Prix USA West, and they had that lined up for 1972, I believe, but they wanted to do in what they call an audition race first, just to see if the track was going to be suitable for Formula One cars. Now, we had already established that David Lockton was an agent, right, and he represented a lot of these Formula One drivers. He had a lot of connections, so he was able to pull this thing off, and it happened in '71. It was called the Quester Grand Prix. It was a non-points paying race for Formula One, but they were able to attract all the big Formula One teams over. Ferrari, Tyrrell, Lotus, all those guys were there. You're talking, Emerson Fittipaldi, Jackie Stewart, Jackie Eakes, all the big names of the day in Formula One were there. To round out the field, they brought in the USAC guys. And so you're talking, AJ Foyt and Mario and John. I misspoke. I'm sorry. AJ Foyt and Mark Donahue, Sweet Savage was in that race. So they brought the USAC guys over. Now, kind of straddling both sides was Mario Andretti. He was well known as a USAC guy, but he was running Formula One at the time. So he was entered as a Formula One driver for Ferrari. But he was, very much a favorite here in the States, Indy 500 winner in '69. So when they pulled this thing off, they put the USAC guys in Formula 5000 cars, which are a little bit down on horsepower to the Formula One cars, but it's more of a similar car. The USAC cars they felt would not be really strong through the road course sections of the track. That being said, the USAC cars probably would have blown away the Formula One cars on the bank parts of the oval. So for whatever reason, they decided on these Formula 5000 cars for the USAC guys. But, I mean, we always talk about, Formula One versus Indy cars, who's going to be faster in a head-to-head race. This actually happened. They did this thing. But because of the fact that the Formula One cars hold so much more fuel than the Formula 5000 cars, they had a bit of an imbalance there where the Formula 5000 cars would have had to pit, but the Formula One cars would not. So they did the race in 2 heats so that there would be no fueling. So they essentially had, 2 mini races there. And the whole thing was just very interesting. The Formula One guys, of course, dominated qualifying. Jackie Eakes, Jackie Stewart up there near the front. And, I think the highest qualified USAC guy might have been Mark Donahue. I'm just trying to remember here. I don't have any notes in front of me, but he was maybe 10th or 11th. So, but when they started this thing, they did the traditional IndyCar rolling start. You've got these Formula One guys at the front. So when they dropped the green flag, these pro guys didn't know what to do. They've never done a rolling start. They're used to the Formula One start and it's just kind of like, somebody going to do something. They're still kind of like going pace lap speed, right? So finally, from 4th place, Jackie Eakes says, I know what to do. Mashes the gas pedal, jumps into the lead, and starts the race. Now the race was a little problematic here and there. There's a lot of attrition in the race. Some mechanical, some devastating crashes. Sweet Savage crashed pretty hard and ended up missing a few months of racing after that. But at the end of the day, it was Mario Andretti who ended up winning both heats of the thing, which made it a smashing success because, hey, here we are. The Formula One can say, hey, we won this thing. And then USAC guys can say, hey, our guy won this thing. Unfortunately, attendance at the thing wasn't great, and it did not lead to a permanent Formula One date, which is what they hoped. but it is one of the more interesting, footnote races in history. It's just a trophy race, a non-points race, but it's something very unique that's never happened before or since, other than like things in the 50s when they brought some roadsters out to Monza. But it's just an interesting little footnote in racing history that happened out in Ontario.
Yeah, it's a cool event to read about. I haven't really looked, but I would love to see some footage of it. The race was 1971, so I'm not sure if it exists.
Honestly, yeah, I've never seen any. I've seen some still photos, and even then, not tons of them. But yeah, I don't know if it's out there on YouTube or not, because I've looked for it, haven't found anything.
Yeah, if anybody out there listening knows of anything, I know our buddy Jason True is a Californian who is big into the racing scene. So, Jason, maybe if you know something, definitely just shoot us a message and let us know.
All right, cool. So now you had mentioned like the Evel Knievel stuff and the concerts and whatnot. All these events were kind of, after the first year with all the big successes, they still didn't recoup enough money to kind of even out what they spent on building the track and on marketing. So that's why they started to bring in the concerts. There were two of them they called California Jam, and like you said, they got nearly 500,000 people in there for these concerts. The Evel Knievel, they brought the NASCAR cars in there 2 days a week, but they still weren't making money. But the interesting thing is, so we talked about the finances for the track earlier. These industrial bonds are, I guess, I'm not a big finance guy, but I imagine they're like stocks that can be bought, right? The price for the bonds dropped to, I believe, as low as 30 cents a share, which allowed for the Chevron Land Company just to kind of jump in there, buy up the majority of the shares, and do a land grab. So pretty much, it's like one day Lockton is the primary owner. Next day, he goes, "Oh, by the way, we own your track and we're closing."
Wow,
Which is
wow.
When we talk about these tracks, they say, "Oh, the real estate became more, and and the crowds were down." This is more of a thing that the company running it was insolvent, and the way they financed the thing, which was clever, very clever the way they got it done, but it left them open to that land grab or hostile takeover, whatever you will call it. And then they began dismantling the track in 1980 after just 10 years.
Wow, that's yeah. I also am not a finance person. If my wife or my brother was awake right now, I would call my brother, ask my wife, but that is not possible at the moment. I don't understand it either. Very, very interesting how it's not the typical land development like most of these tracks have been. But is there anything left of what used to be Ontario Speedway, or is it completely gone from top to bottom?
I want to say there's like little bits here, like part of the front straightaway. And I know just like Riverside, there's a housing community that have some street names that are named after racing things, like there's a Ferrari Lane and those sort of things there. But I think largely it's even from like overhead, it's kind of hard to pick out where the track used to be. There's a giant hotel there, a Hilton Hotel. There's a outlet mall sort of thing there. There's some housing communities, but it's all been built over, and it's just all the grandstands were portioned off. Most of them are in, I believe, in Salinas in the State Fair area. So after all this time, it's kind of hard to pick out if there's anything there, but all that land has been redeveloped. We know that real estate properties in the Los Angeles area are high. So yeah, bunch of shopping and housing.
Yeah, that's the way it goes. But yeah, no, this talking about Ontario has been very interesting to me, who before, you and I talked about it last week. I knew it existed, and I knew it was a very beloved track. I didn't realize it was there and gone before it even had a chance to have a long legacy. But I actually just came across the concert poster, which has like an Indycar, a guitar with an Indycar kind of combination. It looks really cool. I'll put that on social media when we release this episode. But Frank, thank you very much again for educating everybody.
One thing we need to mention before we go out is that when Ontario was put on the USAC schedule, it was the third 500-mile race, because they had Pocono and they had Indianapolis. So this was what you call the Triple Crown. When they first put Ontario on, they had 3 500-mile races. Actually, I want to say Ontario came first, and Pocono was the third, but they had the Triple Crown, and the only guy to win that Triple Crown happened in 1978, and that was Al Unser. So, and we miss the days when we used to have three 500-mile races, because Ontario was replaced with Michigan, and then Michigan was replaced with Pocono was replaced with Fontana. But that mythical Triple Crown that all us oval track lovers would like to see was alive and well when Ontario was still there and active.
Yeah, the good old Triple Crown days. I do like reading about the 500-mile Triple Crown type events within the calendar year. So we will wrap it up with that to discuss our Ontario Motorspeedway history. Again, Frank, I know I mentioned a minute ago, but thank you very much for helping me out through this. It's been a treat. And guys, we will be back with probably at least one or two more of these before the 2020 IndyCar season gets underway. So Frank, thank you very much. And I look forward to doing another one of these with you soon.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. And I really appreciate you folks to tune in and listen.
Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for listening.